Divers and water lovers, what is something you've found while underwater that you can't explain or scared the hell out of you? Serious. I don't know if this counts, but I'm a water lover, so maybe so. While water skiing in the lake one time, Louisiana, when I flew off I landed like pretty much on top of an alligator. I kinda felt my leg hit him and we were like eye to eye when I gasped for air. Then he went under. The moments after that were the most terrifying moments of my life because I was so certain I'd feel him bite my foot any second and drag me under. I started screaming and couldn't stop until the boat was back to me. You don't realize how long 2 to 3 minutes is until you're alone in the open water. Never again for me. I was like 8 to 9 and snorkeling in Hawaii. I turned around in only a couple feet of water and a turtle rammed me full speed in the face. Scared the hell out of me and broke my goggles. To know what the hell it was doing. I was a teen and snorkeling with my dad in Hawaii. Really enjoying ourselves, tons of fish and some smaller sea turtles and no other people. All of a sudden a sea turtle the size of a Mini Cooper starts swimming towards us, came completely out of the dark of the ocean. Scared the piss out of me, literally. I've never swam back to fast in my life. We got back to the shore and walked around to some cliffs and could see the turtle's shell on the surface. It was easily the size of a small car. I was diving with some friends and found a fisherman's glove with a hand still inside it. We brought the glove to the local police and they told us that they hadn't received any kind of report of a guy with a missing hand. I like kayaking when I get the chance, but one day, in a lake up in Glacier Nation Park, Montana, the most beautiful place I've ever been, and I totally recommend it, when I saw a small boat. A little, vintage-looking, tiny motorboat. The little tiny mini speedboats you always see in 70s movies set in Miami or something, just a few feet underwater, perfectly preserved. I could reach down and touch it. There was no signs of damage, no signs of why it sunk. It was strangely eerie. I had to leave because for some reason it just freaked me out. The idea that something could sit inches from the air but still submerged for years, probably. It made me so uncomfortable and I don't know why. Sea snakes are actually super chill and really dumb. They like bright colors so they'll often follow the fins of recreational divers. It's funny when you're in a group and someone's swimming along with their bright pink fins, not realizing they have a couple snakes following them. If you get a snake on your fins you can tag your diving buddy by swimming up from behind and then close over the top of them. 9 times out of 10 the snakes will get confused and latch onto your buddy's fins instead. I was diving in Thailand and we were at a site diving where there were 2 steep hills underwater full of rock formations, coral etc. Between these 2 areas was a sandy bottom with scattered rocks ranging between the 1 to 5 meters across, all full of holes and full of life, where we're swimming from one hill to the next and inspecting these rocks along the way. I was swimming along one large one when I get whacked in the side of my stomach very hard. It startled the shit out of me and I quickly back off. The dive instructor noticed and came over and we inspected what happened. That's when we a gigantic moray eel. I'm later told it was a giant moray. He was absolutely massive, never seen one so big. Was easily a couple meters in length and was probably as wide as my head. We assume I had passed too close without noticing and he attacked. He hit my BCD and luckily didn't persist. I was diving off the Florence, Oregon coast with some friends and we found a body on the ocean floor in the creepiest condition possible. He was a surfer who'd gone missing a few days prior so he wore a wetsuit with his legs, arms, and head exposed. Crabs had eaten the flesh from his exposed bits so basically he was a torso with a skull and skeletal limbs. The creepiest dive of my life though, 2 buddies of mine and I were on a night dive in the Puget Sound hunting prawns. It was about 1 a.m. and we're a good 100 feet deep. The pitchest black you could imagine. We used to do this thing on night dives where we'd get in a circle, turn off our lights, then stir up the water and watch the bioluminescence float around us like floating stars in a black watery space. Beautiful. Only this one time we'd turn off our lights, stir up the water, and the water glows just enough to reveal a 4th person sitting in our circle. We were at a dive resort so it wasn't so odd to see another diver, only it was 1 a.m. we'd seen no one else prepping a dive at the dock. He was also alone which was odd considering the dangerous conditions of a night dive in those waters, and he had no fins or gloves. I don't know how he swam so well without fins or didn't get hypothermia without boots or gloves. We wore dry suits because it was so cold, but this dude was in a wetsuit with exposed skin and we thought we saw a giant gash in one of the legs. So the three of us all notice him and we're too scared to move. I can hear my buddies panting in their rigs, and the guy just smiles and waves, then swims away. That was 100 times creepier than Skeleton Dude. Whenever you think you're alone and someone just shows up, like in an alley at night, it's so weird. 100 feet underwater at night is terrifying. My dad worked for the Forest Service in law enforcement managing the dunes down there. There have been multiple reports over the past several days of a tent out on the rocks near Cape Perpetua, and it had not moved. So my dad pulled over on Highway 101 as he drove by and unzipped the, very expensive, tent, to find a dead couple inside, snuggled against each other in their sleeping bags. What had happened is that they had left a single candle burning in their tent as they fell asleep. As they slept, the candle used up all the oxygen in the tent, and because the tent was so snug and poorly ventilated, designed for cold weather, there was no outside air flowing in, and the tent's occupants died of carbon monoxide poisoning in their sleep. They never felt anything, they fell asleep and never woke up. Moral of the story, never leave anything burning in your tent. Down in La Jolla, California, they have caves along the coast that you can swim through, if the tides are right. This particular day the water level was high enough that you could swim through this one cave that was pretty narrow. Well, it's my turn to swim and when I'm halfway through a set wave comes in and clears the cave while I'm still in it. I was smashed against the side of the cave, bloodied up the back of my shoulder pretty good, but we're thinking, well shit, we just got in the water. We were planning on swimming out to a buoy and then back to shore. So I just say FCK it, let's do it, exposed wound in an area known for great white sightings, no big deal, gotta get a workout in. Well, we get to the buoy and I just have the biggest sense of dread. We're probably a good 15-minute swim from shore and I start thinking about this wound on my arm just leaking shark bait into this giant vast ocean full of stuff that probably wants to eat me. Sure enough, I'm looking down and I see something swimming towards me. It's dark. I'm like what and I started swimming away from it. And I turn around too and I see two more of the same things coming at me from different directions. My face goes completely white, I'm expected to get grabbed and pulled under and never seen again. Nothing happens, my friends can see the look on my face and they're asking me what happened. We all decide to swim in together. My friends were all better swimmers than me, but on that day I beat them all back to the shore easily. I'm practically kissing the sand when I finally made it to the shore and this old man comes up to me and says, "You shouldn't be swimming with that cut on your arm, you're attracting sharks." I was kneeboarding one time in a lake not too far outside of my hometown. The water is very murky and dark. Well, the front end of the board dipped downward into the water but I kept holding onto the rope. I shot probably a good 20+ feet deep in a matter of a couple of seconds and when I let go I completely lost my place at space. It was pitch black and I couldn't tell if I was right side up or upside down. Didn't really find anything scary but being that lost in space is truly terrifying. Started buying more buoyant life jackets from that point forward. I'll never try to ford a creek again after seeing a friend fall down about 40 feet up from where the creek joins up with the Fraser River. You could see he kept the hand with his tackle box up above the water, going farther and farther down, closer to the river. He eventually popped up about 10 feet before the mouth. The water coming out of the creek is colder than the river, so I always think that he would have gone down and under the river with the current, probably not surfacing until he was in the middle of the river, underwater for around 30 seconds. I don't think he realized how close he came to dying that day. Fast running water is terrifying stuff, even if it's only a couple feet deep. When I was younger, I used to dive and snorkel a lot in the Florida Keys. On one trip, I think I was snorkeling, I was swimming and everything was great, until I spotted a group of big barracudas. So, I've run into small sharks and eels while diving, and I'm generally fearless, but I stopped in terror when I saw the barracudas. One in particular was closest to me, while the rest of the group was a little further. He turned a bit and made eye contact with me. They have been known to attack divers, so I swam away slowly. Luckily, they didn't come towards me. I don't think there was a real chance that they would have attacked me, but it was the most worried for my safety that I'd ever been while diving. I think what was the scariest to me was that the sharks and eels had basically ignored me, but the barracuda looked at me, seemed to think about me, and then decided, nah, you can go. Phew. I was in a group with my parents and a bunch of other adults and young children. I was the only young adult. I was probably 18, so I got adventurous and went off a decent way on my own. I'm following this maybe 1-foot barracuda for a little while when I turn around and see two 4-feet barracudas doing the same thing to me maybe 10 feet behind me. That was when I decided to go back to the group. On another note, if I ever saw one of those venomous sea snakes I'd nope, I'd probably be walking on water. South Floridian, here. I grew up fishing and diving, which has led to a few notable stories. The one that sticks out the most was during my high school years. I had just taken a deep breath and gone down to a reef about 30 or so below. My friend was still on the boat above and we were the only ones on the reef. I got down to the bottom and noticed a thin upright pole. Upon closer inspection it was indeed a normal fishing pole, but old and rotten under the water for so long. Right as I was going to grab the pole it was pulled from my hands, just shooting up and away, as if being reeled in by the other side. It was gone within a matter of seconds, so I started my resurface expecting to see another boat responsible. No boats, nothing in sight, but of course just my friend and his boat. I never bothered telling him, because he would have never believed me anyway. The only explanation I might have is that the pole was still attached to a fish or something, although I doubt it. Still gives me goosebumps thinking about it. On one of my night dives at the Flower Garden Banks Marine Sanctuary in either 2005 or 2006, had my first encounter with a beaded sea cucumber. I thought I stepped out of the real world and into a science fiction/fantasy world seeing this long worm with tentacles surrounding its mouth like a cross between a snake and an octopus. Very scary initially, now I look for them because they are pretty cool. On a more recent dive, this spring, although I knew I was going to see it, the whole purpose of the dive after all, finding the 3-year-old 80 pounds golden lab that had been swept away in the spring floods and trapped in debris under a bridge scared the heck out of me when I first found her body visually. Knowing you are looking for it, and actually finding it are two different things, but at least I was able to bring her body home for her family. Scuba diver here. Once I was going along a common route between two underwater waypoints when I found a small shiny object on the sand. I recognized it as part of the assembly which fits on top of the air tank and connects to the breathing regulator. Now this is something you can't breathe without, so it creeped the hell out of me to think about the story of how such a crucial item ended up there. I swam out into the middle of a lake in northern Wisconsin on a warm summer day. I was floating on my back, just relaxing. After a bit, I started thinking about how deep the water was, and then about a horror movie I had recently seen that featured a giant monster bursting up through the water in a lake not unlike the one that I was floating in. I started to feel kind of nervous. Suddenly, I heard the most awful roar as if the lake was exploding beneath me. Terrified, I bolted up to tread water only to see the trailing smoke from a SAC fighter jet that was practicing flying under radar. I sailed around for 3 years so I've got a few. Once we forgot to pull in our trolling line at sunset. Dealing with a fish catch at night is a BTCH, and the line went off. I reeled it in and honestly shrieked like a little girl when I put my light on it. It looked a bit like this. And one time while in the Bahamas the water just lit up under the boat. Like in the movies when aliens come. It stayed that way for a few minutes. I assume it was a whale under the boat churning up the plankton. But it was weird. I also remember exercising lobsters and I looked under a shelf and there were about 5 sharks hanging out under there. Granted, they were nurse sharks, but it was startling, and not really scary but the creep factor was always there. Jump overboard every morning for a bath and without fail barracuda would be under the boat. They creep me out more than sharks ever will. And every morning they would just follow me around as I bathed or washed the hull or whatever. Well, I definitely don't love water, but here's mine. Was down by the beach, was around 13. My brothers and I went down there to play a lot around then. There's a seagull, they're pretty common around there, flies down to the water to grab a tasty fish. Well, it must have misjudged the size, because whatever it was grabbed the seagull and dragged it underwater. Dunno what it was, but I didn't want to play in the same water as it. I was snorkeling in the Caribbean and I got separated from the rest of the group. We had been sticking close to the shore to look at the small fish and things. Touristy stuff. I stayed behind to look at a small school of fish and when I looked up they were all way ahead of me. To catch up, I took a shortcut across deep water. I was swimming along for a while, not seeing any fish or anything, when I just saw a murky outline in the distance. You know, When you're looking at something underwater from a distance and it's just a shape. Like that. But it was huge. Easily bigger than me. Just slowly swimming parallel with me. I didn't take the time to investigate it closer and just swam to shore as fast as I could. Still gives me chills when I think about it. My brother and I were in the water at a beach in Maui. He knows I have a fear of open water, so he was messing with me, like poking the back of my leg with kelp and throwing sand on my back, etc. We were just floating in like 3 feet of water. He had just thrown sand on my back when I turned to yell at him, and he stood straight up and looked past me. I turned around and saw what he saw, the next wave that was rolling in, about a foot tall and 4 feet from where we were. We just saw a long shadow roll by. We got out of the water and I didn't go back in the whole trip. I was diving off the coast of Fiji and we went through a natural tunnel, like a 10-meter cave/passage through a rock formation. So we start swimming through the cave and suddenly the light was weird, like the blue tint from the water has been replaced by a red one. Now all divers will know that this isn't only weird because the color changed, but also because red is the first color to disappear after a certain depth, usually between 30 feet (-10 meters) and 40 feet (-13 meters). And we were over 70 feet. 23 meters, deep. Also bear in mind this was late morning on a sunny day, so imagine this scene: me and my dive buddy are going through an underwater cave and suddenly everything, for no apparent reason, is tinted red, a color that you are literally supposed to be unable to see while diving at the depth during the day. Upon exiting the cave, everything was back to blue. I thought it was just me, so I didn't signal to go back up. After the dive my buddy asked me if I'd seen the water tint red too. We can't explain it, and the folks from the local dive shop had no idea what we were talking about. Was doing a drift dive down in Mexico. Saw a very large grouper off in the distance. Let myself drift towards it. I soon realized it was far bigger than I had thought and I was putting myself in danger, possibly. This thing could have taken me down too far or damaged my gear or knocked me out. I've seen videos of these things eating 4-foot sharks, and this bad boy was bigger than the ones in the videos. I was a bit shaken after that dive. I grew up diving, as my family owned a dive shop. I've dove all over the globe, but the thing that creeped me out most happened on my local lake. I was about 10, and had taken our ski boat from the dock to a secluded cove to look for an abandoned cemetery. The lake was created by TVA in the 30s and displaced an entire town, leaving several places like this lost in the trees with no access. When I got onto the shore, I found a blanket with all the edges tied together to make a bundle. I didn't open it, but did some exploratory poking. There was obviously a cinder block in there, and the rest was just squishy. After a particularly vigorous poke, blood started seeping through the blanket. I hauled my little ass back to the boat and never looked back. Decades later, I still think about that and wonder what was in there. On a lighter note, our shop got a lot of business retrieving dropped items and speedboats that idiots would sink. My dad was the shop's master instructor and normally passed these jobs on to me or one of the regulars. However, he took one job in January to test his new dry suit and took along one of his friends. I was their gear toad, and waited on shore. Dad came up first, and started telling me about this weird-looking fishing lure he'd found while sifting through the silt. About that time, the buddy surfaces and asks Dad why he was playing with that tampon for so long. I had an awesome childhood. So I'm in Cancun, Mexico with my host family, exchange student. There's this hotel that's surrounded by a river thingy that you snorkel in. I can't sink, lol thanks, body fat, so I don't have a life jacket. I'm about a mile of swimming into the river when I see something interesting at the bottom. I struggle downwards, the water was maybe 9 to 12 feet deep. And I see it's a conch shell. What a perfect present for my younger host sister, it's her birthday today and she's love it. I keep trying to swim to the bottom, only to get pulled back up, over and over by my own mass. It's been 30 minutes and I have a headache. I'm not going to give up that easily. I manage to get a hand on the shell, and pull it toward me. Victory! I have a sudden sharp pain on my stomach. I drop the shell in surprise, and I see a little blood coming out of a new wound. I swim to land, and investigate the mark on the shore. The wound was bizarre, shallow but in a shape that looks like the bite from human molars. I've been pinched by crabs plenty of times, and this looked nothing like a crab pinch. Didn't feel like one either. I couldn't figure out what was living in that shell. I scoured the internet and my zoology textbook, but nothing matched my bite marks. To this day, I still don't know what bit me. I was out on a pontoon in a lake with some friends swimming and found like $15 in a pile like 10 feet down. Not really sure what that was about. After that we drank more beer and had a fantastic day. I was diving in Bermuda, 85 feet down, coming out of the wheelhouse of an old fishing boat. I felt something start tapping my hand, turned my head with thoughts of all kinds of horrible terrifying sea creatures reaching out to grab my hand and see a tiny little fish flinging itself into my hand and waving its fins at me as if to say get out of my house. Go on scram. That was when I discovered you could laugh through a regulator. I was snorkeling on a blue hole in the Bahamas, not the one pictured, and this one didn't go straight down but kind of at an angle and it was 6 feet high by 20 feet wide, so more crack-like. I am an avid water dog and can free dive 60 feet if I have flippers on, but this cave being sideways got dark fast. Thing was, there were a ton of angelfish about 25 feet in, so I kept going back down further and further. The last time I went in, I was down far enough I couldn't see more than 10 feet to the sides, so the edges were in complete darkness. All of a sudden I see a huge mass wiggle out and barely come into view. This was longer than me and probably 4 times as massive. I felt my heart seize up in terror and I noped out of there. On reaching the surface and recalling what I saw, I determined it to be a Goliath grouper, which despite its size is a mostly harmless fish. Or maybe I am lying to myself and I saw a sea monster. Either way, I've never been more scared in my life. Buddies. One summer at my cousin's lake house, my cousins and I were out swimming and at one point my sister started screaming bloody murder. All the adults jumped into the lake to drag her out. Turns out she had just had seaweed wrap around her leg. What our parents hadn't told us was that a man had drowned in the lake and his body hadn't been recovered yet. He washed up on our shore the next day, still a little scared to swim in that lake. Went snorkeling off the coast of Mozambique near an island when a dugong swam right under me. It was massive. I literally peed myself. Not sure if this counts, but I learned to scuba dive in False Bay while on vacation in Cape Town a few years ago. Not even a week later, a man was eaten, not just bit, by a dinosaur-sized great white in the same area we were diving. I'm sure this sounds dramatic, but I haven't dived since and probably never will. I get goosebumps just thinking about it. Witnesses describe the terrifying scene. The shark was longer than a minibus, Coppin told the Cape Times newspaper. He said, "It was this giant shadow heading to something colorful. Then it sort of came out the water and took this colorful lump and went off with it. You could see its whole jaw wrap around the thing, which turned out to be a person." News article about the attack. It was my first deep wreck dive, and I was venturing in the hold of a sunken fishing trawler. At the bottom of the dark hold, I found a full-size skeleton. My wife and dive buddy freaked out, and swam straight into the wall. She dropped her dive light, which settled 20 feet below between the skeleton's legs. I dove down alone to get it, because scuba gear is expensive. Up close, that skeleton was an obvious plant. Not necessarily something I found, but while swimming in my town's reservoir I wanted to see how deep the rees went. After diving down at least 15 feet, my feet hit an area of water that turned deathly cold and sent shivers right through my body. Went straight to the surface after that, and I don't plan on seeing how deep the water goes anytime soon. Just going to start this off by saying I'm an idiot when it comes to sea life. When I was little I would grab smaller moray eels, chase barracudas so I can watch them, would pet sea turtles with shells the diameter of 3 or more. But one thing that really scared the piss out of me is when I went down probably 20 to grab a big conch shell I saw, and just as I grabbed at an octopus tentacle the width of my forearm grabbed my arm and squeezed me against the shell. I managed to pull it off me, although it definitely was tough to do. They are strong. Needless to say, I surfaced, went back down to look at the perpetrator, then noped away from it while I still had all my fingers intact. Diving in Cyprus, doing swim-through caves. I've done several of them, but this one it was the first time due to being allowed to do the depth. When we went in, it was glorious sunshine. But in the middle of that cave, it suddenly went dark, to the point where we had to pull out our torches. Creeped me out, as if it was a bad omen. Turned out fine in the end, although it is rare that we have a dive that goes without a hitch. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.